Welcome to the Speak Like a Leader podcast with John Bates. Welcome to the show. With me today is someone, that I have known for a pretty long time. He's one of the luminaries in the San Diego startup scene, and I'll never forget meeting him years ago. He just pretty much instantly became one of my favorite people around. He's a great guy. I think you're going to love what he has to share with us. Today, we are joined by Brant Cooper, and he is the founder and CEO of Moves the Needle, and he's the best-selling author of The Lean Entrepreneur, which is how I found him. Fabulous book, and Disruption Proof, which is also super awesome. That's his latest book. You can reach him at Brant Cooper, Brant at brantcooper.com. So BrantCooper. And you can find him on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Brant Cooper. Thanks for joining me, Brant.
Thanks for having me, John. I'm actually, pretty easy to find.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, you're Brant Cooper on pretty much all social media, right?
Yeah, and it's just not, in the end, not a real common name. There's a few of us out there, though.
Yeah, cool. It's a great name. So, Brant, you and I have known each other for a really long time at this point. Like, it's kind of weird to realize that. And I've been a big fan of yours. And I think one of the things that I really love about what you do is that you are a really good, really clear communicator. Like your books are just awesome. I've heard a number of your speeches. I think you're very heartfelt, and you're also a really great communicator. How much of that is intentional? Are you just purely lucky, or do you actually have to try at that?
Number one, I'm lucky. I think it was my mom, where words were, just super important to her, actually. And it's funny because she's a big fan of England, and was a big fan of the Queen, and really loves the idea of British wit. And of course, that's what it all comes from, right? Is the words and the power of words. And so I think that's where I got it from. And so I've always been in love with words. But I also think that at some point I realized the power beyond just enjoying it, and the power of the meaning of words. And so I definitely have these moments where I'm absolutely flabbergasted that a lot of people can't say what they mean, and they don't mean what they say. And of course, I think that that's the biggest communication challenge that we have in business, but really in the world, is that people are trying to express themselves, and they often fail to come up with the right words, or are using words that don't really mean what they think they mean. It's the Princess Bride.
Yeah, right. That's really funny. I mean, and it's really true, right? I think that one of the things that makes me think of is that saying that the result is the communication. Like, it doesn't matter what you say, what you think you say, like what ends up happening over there, that's the ultimate communication, right? So if you land it, great. But, I talk about this a lot. I used to want to check the box, I told you so. That does not give me the results I want. When I started checking the box, I landed it over there, things changed,
Right. So there's your brilliant leadership lesson, right? So if you want to just be smart and say things precisely, and you're going to hang your hat on that and not on what the outcome is, then okay, so be it. You're a smart person who's not accomplishing much, at least with your team, right? And so it was a journey for me to go from really learning the power of words in ways that I don't know, just personal growth wise, where you're actually sending somebody a dig, but you kind of deny it, right? Because that would make you not a great person. And so eventually you sort of learn as you grow older to own that, and then so maybe stop doing it. And
Right.
and it actually even is a throwback to my mom with the British witticisms are often, like these cuts, right? Well,
Yeah.
so own it and maybe do it a little bit less. But also even beyond that, the evolution becomes, okay, my style isn't working, or I'm being too short, or I have to repeat it several times, or I have to repeat it in different ways. I mean, what is the objective? Again, it really gets down to what the desired outcome is. And if what you're really going for is changing people's behavior for the benefit of yourself or your business or even for them, then you have to go through these different iterations on how you're communicating things in order to achieve that desired outcome.
Right. Right. So what's, I'm kind of thinking about disruption proof and what you communicated in there. Will you just kind of give us a little overview of what you talk about there, and then let's talk about that message and where it came from and how you communicated it?
Yeah, so true. I mean, you use the word disruption, especially if you're anywhere near corporates or corporate innovation or startups, then, supposedly we're referring to disruptive innovation or disruptive technology. And we've certainly, those of us that have been around tech for a while have been through many such disruptions. And in my business moves the needle. My team and I have been helping companies develop new products and go to market, et cetera, for very large enterprises for a decade. And so that's really what the book was going to be about, is how do you go and do that? The pandemic actually changed it. So I'm using the same words that I was before, but maybe now I'm going for a slightly different meaning, which really is that technology disruption isn't really the biggest obstacle companies are facing or startups are facing. And in reality, I think most corporations don't have to do breakthrough or disruptive innovation,
Yeah.
but that the pandemic itself represents a disruption, and that kind of disruption is the new norm. And it's really because that we live in this digital age now. It's not just the industrial age, that the 50s and the 60s and creating these amazing new products and all the rest. All great stuff, but it was a different era, and we live in this digital age now where we're globally interconnected, where the speed of information and misinformation and disinformation moves at the speed of light, and the customers have all sorts of power over brands, really knowledge of who's failing and who's screwing somebody else, and who's the problems here and the problems there, and it gives them a lot of power, which is a great thing. But it just means that we face a complex and uncertain world, and these disruptions like the pandemic and ransomware attacks and supply chain issues and energy grid collapses and the big quit, and I mean, just on and on. These things have sort of always happened, but now they all ripple across the economy, and they ripple across their businesses, and they can happen at any time. And this old structure, this old stable command and control hierarchical institutions don't work anymore. They can't survive all of these disruptions. And I feel like the intention of the book is to describe the angst that we're feeling and the reason why we have all of that angst. And then here are some steps that we can redesign our institutions. And so not just companies, but education and government and nonprofits and unions even. Just restructuring of our institutions such that they are able to weather the storms of disruption that is the new normal.
Okay, so there's so much in what you just said,
All in one book. Can you believe
Yeah.
it?
Well, I mean, can I take you, because I'd like to kind of go through this. I don't want to preview the book to the point of ruining it for people, but I would love to hear a little bit about kind of what your solutions, or what the direction you're pointing in for our institutions is. But I think that this whole thing got brought home to you a couple years ago in a way that was maybe unexpected?
Well, yeah. I mean, did anybody expect the pandemic? And I mean, I don't know. Just in my personal life, the disruptions also seem to be continuous and endless from, I don't know, just the struggles my daughters have had in dealing with the complex world and social media and just the angst in the world, and my personal bout with cancer, and just it feels like even in the present tense, wave after wave,
Yeah.
and it just causes a lot of people, certainly me, to reflect, to take time to be even maybe more introspective than we were before.
Right.
And I think that all of the institutions naturally are an extension of ourselves. And so me being introspective and, I use the phrase RAD to talk about these new organizations: resilient, aware, and dynamic. So that describes what I have to be as well as a human being, as an individual. You have to be able to pick yourself up. You have to be aware of things that are going on around you, and you have to be willing to change what you're up to based upon new information.
Yeah. Yes. Well, so do you mind telling us the story that kind of starts with there's a ransomware attack at Scripps?
Okay, so May 2021, I get word that there's been this massive ransomware attack at Scripps Health System, which is one of several major health systems in San Diego. And what was interesting to me about it was that it lacked a patient perspective. In other words, the news was reporting that, yeah, patients can't, access my scripts on their mobile phone, and they can't access their portal, and there's problems scheduling appointments, uh, and so maybe all appointments are canceled for today and tomorrow. And I'm sitting there going like, that doesn't really sound that bad. I wonder what's really going on. And as the days go by, I'm sort of tapped into different areas of the economy, and I'm starting to hear about IT workers that are stressed and overworked, caregivers, and messes at the labs. So lab orders are coming in via fax. I mean, if you can imagine, John, pre-internet, you remember the shelves that had all of the folders of all of the
Oh,
patients,
dude,
and that you got a
totally.
fax and you went and you put it in the folder? Well, the folders don't exist anymore.
Right.
So in the labs, the faxes are literally stacking up, and the staff there has never worked in an environment that wasn't digitized, and people are bringing new blood work orders by hand from the hospital that's next door and from other offices, and everybody is sort of being like, well, I think that if I hand it to this person, I'm going to be the top priority, right? So it's just a complete mess. And it's the same thing with the local pharmacy. They're not getting anything via their normal channels, and they're having to do it. So it's doing a little bit of digging. I found that it seems like there was a lot more going on than what was reporting to the news media, and I even kind of pointed that out to some contacts in the news media. But of course, ultimately, I got the call that my cancer treatment was canceled. So, so this is one of the reasons, obviously, that I was so in touch with what was going on, is because I was a patient there,
Yeah.
and and you just could not tell from the outside that because of ransomware attack, cancer treatment's not happening.
Mm.
And so I'm thinking about, well, what other care is not happening?
Yeah.
And what degree of emergency status are some of these other patients in? And what are they doing with emergencies, as a matter of fact? And it turns out they're routing them to other hospitals, but that wasn't
Hmm.
really being reported. And it starts getting me to think about, John, well, what about all of these cities and communities that actually only have one healthcare system? And they exist all over the country. And a matter of fact, there's a lot of places in the country that you have to drive an hour or more in order to get to any healthcare facilities. And one ransomware attack takes them all out.
Yeah.
And so, my background in tech and in what I call lean innovation, which is a combination of human-centered design and rapid experimentation and agile practices. And so we work with technology companies and large corporations on new products. And it just dawned on me, who's designing for this larger context? Who's designing for when these disruptions happen? The business of scripts is not scheduling patients. It's not even managing healthcare records. This is something that they do in support of their mission. Their mission is providing great healthcare for the patients of San Diego, for the people of San Diego.
Yeah.
Well, so if a ransomware attack takes down the healthcare system, then they are failing. They are no longer pursuing, let alone accomplishing their mission. Well, so who's designing for that? Who actually is keeping that in mind when you're making decisions like, well, we can't have redundant IT because that's too expensive, or we can't put people through the caregivers through training so that they can continue to provide care while the IT systems are down because that's overhead costs. That's too expensive. So all of these decisions made based upon purely financial efficiency metrics, which is, sort of defines corporate America in the 21st century.
Yeah.
All of those type of efficiency metrics cut into the muscle of the mission such that when these disruptions happen, it's quite possible that these organizations, and I don't mean to pick on scripts, all of these organizations cannot pursue their mission. And that's a problem.
Yeah.
And it's a 21st century problem. It's a digital age problem. And you're not going to solve that problem with technology. You have to solve that problem by thinking about your ecosystem. You have to think about the interconnectedness of the organizations, not only within themselves, but also with other players in the ecosystem. And I just think that we're not designing at that level of context yet.
Well, and Brant, that's one of the reasons I'm so excited to talk to you about this, because you and I have been going back and forth about this a little bit recently in our private conversations. And one of the things that strikes me is just, this is really big picture thinking. This is not the thing that had occurred to me the other day, but it did occur to you. And it's such an enormous thing. And there is so clearly not an answer that exists right now that it's almost hard to conceive of it, So I really acknowledge you for I'm sorry that it took what it took to have you get that, but I'm really glad you did. And I'm really glad we're talking about it. And one of the things that just occurs to me as we're talking about it again now is, I think on a lower level, it's kind of this issue of I guess it gets reflected in the fact that we got so stretched to the edge of our capability in terms of logistics and things by just in time, right? So, we've got just in time supply chains, right? We have nothing stored anywhere. We have no backup anywhere. We're just only getting this stuff right exactly as we need it in real time. And there's great savings in that. But then boom, the pandemic, right? And all of a sudden, those savings don't look like they were maybe worth the savings. You know what I mean? And then to go to an even larger context of just this whole digital ecosystem, who's thinking about that enormous context when we're bringing things like not just really amazing data sets and understandings of data and huge amounts of data and all that, but we're also bringing AI into this context. And we obviously are not very good at that. You know what I mean? Like, we just spent tons of money and used the most brilliant AI minds in the world to create a bunch of algorithms that do nothing more than separate us and make us hate each other. That was really freaking brilliant, you know? So, and then we're going to bring a lot more of that into our ecosystem. And there's nobody that's in a role to do that. Right. So, like, what do we do?
Well, so it's, I'm a big fan of lean.
Yeah.
And when, this lean as how Toyota was manufacturing cars in the 50s, right, is when it started. And the original definition that I learned was that you're trying to eliminate or reduce waste in production of value for the customer. So that is an ecosystem statement right there.
That's great.
And so when the West adopted that, they just sort of dropped the in value to the in service to the production of value for the customer, and just, well, no, we just want to be efficient. And so if you you're inside an organization, and I've actually been writing about this the last couple of days, in the face of this manufactured recession, we're going to have cuts. And the way most of the cuts happen is a senior executive just says, okay, well, here's the blanket cuts. Everybody has to reduce costs by 10%, right? And so there's no concept of cuts in proportion to the value that we're creating for customers. It's just blanket. So if you go to your IT department and you say, okay, you're cutting 10%, and you go to your supply chain people and you go, okay, you're cutting 10%. You go to your product people and you say, if you're trying to reduce the cost in the production of value, you're not going to do equal cuts, because you're going to ensure that what we're still doing is producing the value that we're signed up to produce. Yeah. That is the mission of the company. It's the mission of the organization to produce value. And so if you're doing just in time, then you go, well, okay, we have this just in time supply chain, but what happens? I mean, nobody would have predicted this, but now we could say, what happens if a ship gets stuck in the Suez Canal and we only have this one supply chain? We're actually not able to produce value, which is our mission. And so you can have just in time, but still have redundant supply chains.
Right. That's good.
If you're not just telling the supply chain to cut their costs. Right? So
yeah.
So I think that this is what's missing in the Western version of lean and these other concepts, is that they lose the mission part of it. If we're listen, I'm all for being efficient in the conduct in the creation and delivery of the value. What I'm opposed to is efficiency just for efficiency's sake.
Right.
That's what gets us in trouble. So I was when I was a young IT guy, you survived one disaster without a disaster recovery plan or a backup plan, right? I mean, yeah. Disaster number 2 comes and you don't have that stuff, then you're out.
Yeah.
And it's because the business is only going to survive if it has those things in place. So like a small business owner naturally knows that it's not about just pure cost. I'm not going to tell my IT department, my young IT guy, no, you can't do a disaster recovery plan. No, you can't do offsite backups. I don't care if there's another disaster and we go out of business. That's just the way the world, that's the way the ball bounces, right? So he's not going to say that. He knows intrinsically that what his job is to keep the business going no matter what. And so that means, okay, yes, you can have a budget for your disaster recovery. Yes, you can have a budget for your failover equipment and your backup tapes and all those type of things. And so there's a natural way to do this from a business perspective. We've just lost it. We've forgotten how to do it. And I think that there's a way to get onto a virtuous cycle again which is forcing companies to compete based upon creating value. And if one company, and teaching these companies again how to create value and how to measure efficiency based upon the mission of the company, not just as each silo is financially efficient. We can relearn those things, and it ends up being that you can empower people to solve those problems, and now people enjoy their work more, and they feel like they're driving impact, and so they're more loyal to the company, and you start reversing things like the big quit, and you start reducing things like burnout, and it creates this virtual cycle where we're fulfilling the promise of capitalism, which is raising the standard of living and making people's lives better and easier and all of these other type of things. And I think that optimistically, I think we're at the bottom of the vicious cycle, and we're hopefully turning towards the virtuous cycle.
Yeah, boy, amen, brother. I hope you're right. And I can see little green shoots for optimism in that. So, and I suppose that if people want to really get the how and all of that, they should go grab the book. Yeah. Disruption.
Well, sure.
Proof.
I mean, I always like it if people buy the book, but I also am happy to just talk about it and engage with people on it. What I try to do fundamentally is describe the behavior of people that we want to see, and it's really the behavior in all of these institutions that we're talking about, from the front lines to the C-suite. And I describe those as being the 5 E's, and I won't spend too much time on it, but basically, empathy.
I love the 5 E's.
Yeah. The
tell
first
us
E
that.
is empathy. So hopefully going beyond the corporate buzzword of empathy, but it's understanding each other deeply, understanding customers deeply, understanding your employees even attempting to understand their bosses deeply. What's driving them? What is their background? Why do they make the decisions that they do? And it's not necessarily that you're going to be able to influence those decisions or change those decisions or build products for everybody or implement policies where everybody's needs are taken into consideration, but you at least can understand why things are happening the way they are the more that you understand people. And so learning how to develop empathy and practicing empathy is just super important. The second E is exploration, and so that's admitting when you don't know something, and this gets to the vulnerability, especially of leaders, of being able to say, hey, listen, I don't know, things aren't working the same way they did before. We need to spend some time to go out and learn what works again. And so you put that on the calendar, and you invite all your customers in, or you run experiments, or you go ask experts, or do whatever it takes to admit that you don't know and go and search for answers again. And then the third E is evidence. We don't want, you mentioned AI. We don't really want data to make decisions for us, but data is important and should inform our decisions. So the insights that we glean, the data that we're collecting, the experiments that we're running, these can inform our decisions, and we want to make sure that they're helping us cut through our biases. And then the fourth E is equilibrium. So we have to find the right balance in our organizations between exploration and execution, and the right balance between work and non-work. The reason why everybody doesn't want to come back to the office is because people have learned that they can accomplish their jobs in half the time. So sitting, on a freeway or in a cubicle for no apparent reason is just silly, and it's wasteful. And so we should allow people to balance their lives with all of the other things that make them a contented human being. And that means that then when they show up, they're showing up as their authentic self, and they're showing up as creative and intelligent people that are solving problems. They show up as powerful people, and that's what we want inside our organizations. That's why we hire them. And then finally, the fifth E is ethics. Instead of just values on our website, we have to build it into our work. And you can do this. You build guardrails into the behaviors. And I'm a big advocate of forming teams, agile teams, not necessarily rigid implementations of agile, but teams that are able to themselves decide what's the best way to get things done. How are they accomplishing their mission? and you establish behavioral guardrails where we must keep our customers safe. You know, we must not give them these video feeds that make them feel anxious and make them depressed. And we must not sell diet pills to anorexic women. And we must not sell aversion therapy to gay people. I mean, there's boundaries that we can create in the behavior so that we're maintaining our community and maintaining our human touch with each other. And these behaviors, I think, these 5 E's, these 5 elements, will allow us to start, again, putting this virtual cycle in place where we're focused again on creating value for fellow human beings.
I love that. I love that. And I love the 5 E's. And, you know, as I have them, I'm looking at them and they're written kind of one on top of each other. And that fundamental last one is the basis, like from my point of view, as I look what I've been, you know, the notes I've been taking. And I love that you bring ethics back into this. I wonder how we ever got so far away from our values, you know, like, I mean, everybody's got this statement of values on their website, but like, what about actually building our values into our work, building our values into how we speak and how we act and what we actually do, you know, like, it's really important. Like, there's a reason we've been talking about ethics for thousands of years, you know?
Yeah, you know, there's a quote I put in my book from, I don't remember if it was from Hewitt or Packard, but basically it was, from Hewitt Packard, where they're talking about this in the 50s or the 60s, and how important these ethics is in maintaining the safety and the value for customers and these type of things. And what's funny is a lot of people point to Milton Friedman's infamous article on what the role of companies is, and I think it was like 1970 or something like that, or 72. And what's interesting is if you read the Milton Friedman article, he says explicitly in there that companies have a responsibility to, number one, follow the law, but also social norms. And so everybody that looks at, oh, well, capitalism can't do that, and it's only to return value to shareholders, and so, you know, all of these other things will work out based upon the market and all this other kind of rubbish. And even Milton Friedman said laws, social norms.
Yeah.
And so, you know, corporations do have a responsibility for both of those things. I'm not someone that says that, you know, Uber needs to be solving homelessness. Homelessness is not in Uber's mission. It's just not. And there are better ways to solve big social problems than simply asking all of the capitalists to contribute to that. It's not going to happen. It probably wouldn't work very well if it did.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I think that we should make all public companies have to report their sustainability and diversity metrics just like they share their financial metrics.
Yeah.
This is a market-based solution. In other words, investors and customers would be able to look at those reports and decide whether they wanted to invest or do business with those companies in the exact same way as they do with financial metrics.
Right.
And so there's really no difference there, and we should force companies that are listed to put those things out there. And in that way, I do think that companies would start living their stated values, because because in order to, you know, right now all they got to do is throw them up there and pretend that they're doing all of these things, and there's no accountability. And so this is trying to put a market-based level of accountability onto those statements. If you want company, you can take those values off your website. You don't have to do anything.
Right.
But if you are doing them here, you have to report what you're saying, essentially, and then allow people to choose whether they're going to do business with you. And a matter of fact, I think that would be like such a quick and easy fix. NASDAQ a year or 2 years ago requested from the SEC that they require all NASDAQ listed companies to report on diversity metrics. And so that's extraordinary. That's NASDAQ asking the SEC. It doesn't require new laws, I don't think.
Right. Yeah.
It could just be an executive order. And I think it would fundamentally start changing behavior. And we should have done it yesterday. But I think I'm the only one talking about it that I know of. So
Well, it'd be
got a lot.
really interesting too, because then you could look and track performance over time against those metrics and see what the truth is about how that impacts things, right?
Right, and there's also no doubt that it's more important to people, especially young people, right? And
Yeah.
so I think for these corporations and these different brands to continue to attract people of color and to attract the LGBTQ community and to attract younger people, they're going to have to start behaving better. And so let's require them to provide metrics that we can hold them accountable to.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just looking at the time. It's like total like new lane. Who is somebody in your life and career that was a great leader that had an impact on you and your outlook, Brant? Can I
Yeah,
ask that?
there's been a number of people over time. I always kind of start with my dad, who was the most principled person I had ever met in my life, and I guess I was always just sort of astounded by his principles. I don't think I've even lived up to that, but it's something that I admire and respect so much, and I miss him dearly. Um, but going through other stages in my life, it's people that have, you try not to overjudge people, and so we tend to like, somebody makes a mistake, we ignore all of their great things, and I don't think that there's been anybody in my life that's been perfect, and so I've got good stories and bad stories from people that managed me in my life and in startups, and like the first real startup I was at was Tumbleweed Communications, and the CEO Jeff Smith uh, was really inspirational, and I always thought it was interesting that he was so much younger than me, and I was like, but he still completely inspires me. So there was some learning in there, but basically, he would stand up in front of the company and really believed, hey, we're going to change the world, we're going to go out and make the world a better place. And I absolutely love that, and I've always kept that close to me, and I ended up being that for some of my companies further along down the path, because that's what people want to be a part of. They want to be part of this sort of larger mission. So it's not
Yeah.
just the mission of the business, but it's making the world a better place. So I
Yes.
always appreciated that about him. And there was another guy in that same company who I don't think that our values were very much aligned, but he taught me how to treat everything like a project. And so it was like one of those really simple things that allowed me to become a more disciplined worker and communicate better about what I was doing and what I was up to. And so there's little lessons there.
Yeah.
So I don't know that I have sort of that one, shining light, other than my dad perhaps,
Yeah.
but I've tried to pick up things from, people that have been in my life, all along in the journey.
That's cool. That's great. Well, thank you, Jeff Smith. I think that you picked up the mantle of go out and make the world a better place, Brant. So I think you've been doing that for years now.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that.
So you know, what would you say? I've got, I think we've got people listening here who are in startups. They may be Series A, Series B. A lot of them are big medical device or pharma related companies with lots of money on the line, lots of stuff at stake. We've got a lot of top leaders at organizations like Johnson and Johnson and Boston Scientific listening. You know, what would you want to say to just kind of that world of people?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's probably different. I mean, I think that to the startups, what I would say is that you're being taught how to organize your company, structure your company like the middle of the industrial age. And so you should be bold and structure your company differently. And basically what I like to try to say is that you can structure a company so that the natural output is exploration behavior, or those 5 E's that I'm talking about. And sort of this team dynamic. I think everybody in a organization should be on a team. The team provides this social accountability to the mission and a social accountability to the ethics that are defined in that mission. And it also just it's just people are social, and I think that
Yeah.
there's too much individuality going on in the terms of being forced on people. Everything is designed to put distance between us, when the number one issue in the world, in the U.S., is probably loneliness and
Yeah.
isolation. So it's
Yeah.
really crazy that people don't even realize that what they need is more interaction and more community. And so I think we should just build it into the business. And I think that that's probably true at the top of the big corporations that you're talking about as well. But I guess for them, I would like them to really think about what the mission of their organization is, and whether they're measuring efficiency based upon the output, based upon the value that they're creating, as opposed to once again, measuring efficiency based upon the individual silos that happen to be inside that organization.
Okay. Wow. That's great. I love that. I think those are both great messages. And I think you're right. I think that the community and the team and the doing things together, that's one of my biggest messages to any team, any group, any company, anywhere. So those big corporations, I think, need that just as much as the startups. And I love the
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah, we talk about things in such a binary way, like the hybrid work thing. It's like, oh, well, young people want to be nomads and they want to work from home and all the rest. But in fact, young people actually want the social interaction. They want to be around people their age. They want mentoring. They want to
Yeah.
be seen inside their organization.
Yes.
So it's not as so simple as being home or away, and the same
Right.
thing with senior leaders. They're like, well, I've got a great home office and I'd like to see my kids more, and I would like to, spend more time doing these other things. I don't want to sit in traffic an hour and a half every day. But I also do want to be there for my teams, and I want to help manage, and I need to be visible. And so I think that it's really frustrating that people go for these simple binary black or
Right.
white solutions. And I think that in the end, if everybody's working on the team, well, the team can decide when they need to get together, and maybe they can do it at a co-working place instead of driving in, or instead of doing it remote.
Yeah.
So you have to empower the people themselves to determine what's the best way to get these things done.
I totally agree. It goes back to your 5 E's, and I think equilibrium is a great word. I think equilibrium, you could say balance, work-life balance. I always wondered why it was so much easier to just go completely to one side or the other versus staying balanced. Because I had this picture of balance like scales, you put like 5 grams on this side, you put 5 grams on that side, and it stays
Right.
balanced. But that's not it. It's much more equilibrium. It's a rolling, very thin rolling bicycle tire, right? And
Right.
so
Well, yeah.
when you don't put any energy into that thing, it loses its equilibrium and it falls to the right side or it falls to the left side. And it doesn't even matter which side it falls to. It's just falling to one side versus staying in equilibrium, which takes a constant input of consciousness and energy to stay and keep that equilibrium, right?
Right, and multivariate too, right? I mean, so
Yeah.
it's not just what the human being's doing. It's the surface that the bike's on. It's the weather. It's the
Yes.
wind. It's the even the construction of the tire, the width of the tire. I mean, so there's all of these variables that go into creating an equilibrium in the system.
Yeah.
And so this is really where, I make an argument in the book that the government has to be the one that's responsible for establishing what that equilibrium is, because it's the only one that can have, sort of their hands on all of those different levers.
Yes.
It's up to the human beings, us, the people, to decide what the outcomes we want that equilibrium to produce. And that's what politics are. And so that's fine.
Yeah.
I'm not actually in this moment dictating what I believe that output should be. But the government is the only institution that actually can determine what the construction of the system is in order to achieve an equilibrium that has what the population decides is the desired outcome.
Yeah. Yeah. Really good point. Really good point. Well, so listen, we're coming up on time. Is there any last thing you'd want to say, or anything I didn't ask you about that I should have asked you about, just to close up?
I just, no, I mean, I think it's, I love having the conversation with you, John. I'm sure we'll continue this, over an IPA, but
Yeah.
I think that the complexity of the book is really that we're touching on a bunch of different factors here. We're talking about organizational design. We're talking about culture. We're talking about, redefining work even, and organizing a company in order to produce this value. And so there's a lot of complicated things in there. And what I think is that's where the opportunity is. I think that kind of means anybody that's working in these organizations, whether they're a startup that's just first, starting to organize, or it's a huge company. There's so much that needs to be done. We just really need everybody to go like, listen, I'm going to do what I can. I'm going to exercise my creativity and my intelligence, and I want to contribute in this particular way, and I'm going to go for it. And that's, what else can we ask for is, I think it ends up, I know for me personally, it ends up being part of who I am, and it makes me feel like I'm having an impact, and that's really what the value is that one gets out of life, I think, is trying to provide value to other human beings and to try to live, something that's meaningful beyond what's just between my two ears.
Yeah. Well, fabulous. And I'm just glad to know you're in the world. And you mentioned earlier your bout with cancer. I think that's still maybe slightly ongoing for you, but you're doing okay. And I know I send you my absolute best healing vibes, and I think everybody who's listening just wants the absolute best for you, and I wish you all the best in that. And I thank you for the good that you draw out of that experience and then share with the world. Cause I think it's a really big idea. I think it's a really important idea. And I think what you talk about in the book is just beyond important. And, so, let's hope that that's what this was for. And you got kind of this wake up call, you got this great idea, and now you're going to, be talking about it for a long, long time.
Well, thanks, John. I appreciate that. You're a good man. I value you as a friend.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Likewise, Brant. So, and to those of you listening, thank you for joining us here on speaklikealeader.show. If you like the show, please share it with someone. And if you have a minute and you'd give us a 5-star review and maybe a couple nice comments, that helps us get the show out to even more people. And Brant, thank you very much for taking your time to join us and share all this with us. It's been a total blast.
Yeah, thank you, John. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, till next time, have a great couple days, have a great week, have a great whatever it is, and we'll see you next time on speaklikealeader.show. Thank you for joining the Speak Like a Leader podcast. Go be awesome.